Hi, everyone. My name is DJ Williams, and I'm the host of Hazing Crimes, the podcast. Tonight, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the law as it relates to hazing. When Stone died, we were not familiar with what the hazing penalties were for hazing. Come to find out, it was just like getting a parking ticket. Someone dies, and the penalty is a parking ticket. It forced us to learn a lot. And you're dealing with a situation where your emotions are high, your brain is not working right, it cannot process things in the way that you normally would want them to be processed. And unfortunately, you are required to learn a lot. When we found out that Collins Law was in place, but never got approved, really made us think a lot about what we were doing and how could we make a change. So quickly, we got involved. Sherry and Corey went to the Senate, Ohio Senate, and pleaded their case as to why Collins Law should be in place. Our belief was that if Collins Law was in place prior to Stone, that he would have survived. And he would have survived because the law would have been in place, parents would know more about what's going on, visibility would be there, the universities would understand that we're holding them accountable to the number of incidents that occur, and the fraternity that Stone was joining, Pike, we would have known a lot more about. And as a result, the crimes that the young men were charged with were much lower level of misdemeanor. It was just like a parking ticket. So tonight, I'd like you to meet Sean Alto with Cooper and Elliott. He's a lawyer there, and he has helped us the entire time. The last couple years, he's been right by our side and is now our friend and part of our family. I'd like you to get to know Sean. Sean Alto is with us today, and he's a lawyer with Cooper and Elliott. He's an accomplished attorney with a refined approach to client representation. At his core, he believes people dealing with the worst situations of their lives deserve understanding and high-quality guidance. Sean makes a difference for his clients by quickly and efficiently navigating cases with minimal distractions at the highest possible value. But what's more, his work and tireless commitment to justice makes a positive impact on society, influencing public policy, and generating national news. Thanks, Sean, for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me, DJ.
I appreciate it. This entire bio represents you well.
Appreciate that.
I remember the time that we met on the phone.
Never forget it.
Yeah, it was a tough call. I remember being so confused that I had to ask you to spell your first name and your last name. And it's like, I just remember walking in the hospital and I just couldn't keep anything together. And you were as calm as could be and told me that anything I needed, call anytime. And I did.
You did. And I will never forget getting that call. I was sitting in my kitchen and went in the office. Next thing I knew, we were on the phone, and I didn't come out of the office until, Monday or Tuesday. It was nonstop. And you guys had understandably a lot of questions, and you needed somebody to sort of take that off your plate, some of the things that we could do. And we did the best we could, and hopefully it helped.
Yeah, I remember Stone was struggling, of course, in the hospital, and we really didn't understand what had happened, right? And it was a situation where you didn't really know what to do, but when the siblings were getting media calls, right? Asking that, did your brother die yet? And it's like all these things that are said and you're just way confused. And I just knew something was weird, right? Because why else would I call? I have no idea why I called. But I remember you guiding us through that and talking about, tell me about Stone, right? And the way that you walked me through that made me feel like we had the right people right away. So I appreciate that personally.
I appreciate hearing that.
let's get into some of these things here that we typically talk about on the podcast. From our point of view, we've been spending a lot of time talking about how the family was impacted. Give me your perspective on what it was like for you as a parent, as a lawyer. You have different perspective on what you're seeing, right? We're seeing our loved one die and in front of our eyes, right? And not understanding what really happened. But I know that it had an impact on the hospital, the nurses there. We've stayed in contact with them. So I'm sure that it had impact on you. Kind of share with us what that was like.
Sure. So, as you know, I am a parent. I have 3 little kids, also a lawyer, and it's really hard to separate those two things out. Anytime you're dealing with a case like this where someone's seriously injured or unfortunately passes away, I have a job to do, and I, for better or worse, need to separate out my parental thoughts and feelings and sort of step into the role of, I am a lawyer. I am representing a client. I view that role as a protector, as someone who needs to figure out answers to questions. While I've never been in your shoes or Sherry or Corey's shoes, I've been through cases like these, which I think helps me guide you and the family in what is to come. And, getting phone calls from the media, a situation like this, where there's all these questions and someone's in the hospital and all that, there is national and international media attention, and you don't want to be getting phone calls, and the kids should never be getting phone calls. But even just to get in front of that and say, direct all those calls to me, we will handle it. I view my role in that sort of initial phase as, what can I take off your plate so you can focus on what's really the most important? And that's Stone, right? And that's doing the things you need to do to be there for him. And that's my lawyerly role. From a parental role, it's really challenging. I want to wrap my kids up in bubble wrap, right? Not just because of this case, but because of all the cases that I've handled. There's always a dangerous product, a dangerous person, a dangerous company. If I could keep my kids wrapped up and never send them out into the world, but I realize that's not realistic. And the effect that this and other cases have had on me is, I and my wife feel compelled to have more serious conversations about risk with our young kids, even the 5.5 and the 4-year-old, about things that I otherwise maybe wouldn't have those conversations. And we're at some event and the kids want to do something, and no, you can't. And maybe I should be doing less of that, but I'm not ready for that.
And I think that's okay, right? If we had more conversations, if we had more insight as to what to warn Stone by, right? I mean, having those conversations are what we're asking people to do, right? Talk openly and honestly about it. So talk to me about what hazing means to you. And if you were to describe that to a middle school student, how would you describe it?
So I view hazing as, I think there's a million different definitions, and I don't think necessarily the legal definition or a case site or anything like that is what do it justice. I think the way I can kind of boil it down, if I'm talking to a middle schooler, would be, imagine you're a middle schooler and you want to join an organization. And in order to join that organization, you're asked to do something that is embarrassing, is something that you wouldn't otherwise do. It doesn't necessarily have to be dangerous. It doesn't have to be deadly. It can be something that, but for your desire to join that group, you wouldn't do. And we both know that oftentimes, the hazing activities start off things like dressing up or getting food or things that by themselves are not dangerous or deadly or anything like that, but they escalate. Yeah. They escalate year over year. They escalate within the year, right? You start off, hey, get me food. Hey, do my laundry. Hey, clean up the house after a party, to what we know happened, drink this giant bottle of liquor, right? And so you got to get it early. And it's not just early in that process. It's like what you all have been doing, is getting into schools, getting into high schools, getting into middle schools. The earlier we can start that education, the better chance we have of stopping it. I
agree. I mean, I think that when we talk about statistics, right, And they talk about almost 50% of the college students have experienced hazing. Now, they probably didn't call it hazing. They probably said it's just part of athletics. And I think when you take that into consideration, the more that high school student knows that that is wrong, it's damaging, it's degrading, it's humiliating, sometimes extremely physical, sure, abusive. If they would just understand that, how devastating that is to the individual, right? And actually going through that process, I think, is something that we've got to understand. I know you were looking at a couple of the books that are back here, but
recognize the names,
right? And the brain, right? And how the brain works and how it doesn't. And one thing I'd like to talk about is this idea around, girls and boys, right? And difference between thinking about consequences and not. Guys have a tendency just to go for it, right? They just do it. They don't think about it. I do think that girls have a tendency to wonder, what would happen, right?
Sure.
How will you help your children through that, right? And that idea that, especially because you get a little boy, right? And his ability to be able to consider consequences. How do you have that conversation?
Well, so my wife was in a sorority. I was not in a fraternity. So my initial reaction, as you may imagine, was no Greek life,
right,
period. And my wife's like, well, let's, talk about this. She went to Miami University and she did the sorority thing and largely had a good experience. She didn't experience anything like any of the stuff that we've talked about. But she had friends in fraternities who did experience hazing. And I think for us, and by the way, I don't think that a single conversation is enough. I don't think it's got to be ongoing. And there's a lot of that we could talk about. But for us, how are we going to do it? Hopefully I do a good job. Hopefully we do a good job. That's the best I can say because, that's a tough one. That's a tough one because, again, it's the most important thing in life, right? It's family to me. And making sure, I think being a good dad, being a good parent is way more important than anything else I do in my entire life. And so I will do everything I can, every conversation I can have. I think, we talk about the dangers with them now, but I think it's too early in my mind to start talking. But as they get into middle school, certainly, and they get a little older, and they're going to experience bullying, right? Which is a form of hazing. They're going to experience things like that in school. And I think starting those conversations as early as possible. And I think talking about what daddy does for work and mom, my wife does, she's a lawyer. She does different kind of law. But talking about the kind of cases that I handle and the things that I see where people get hurt or killed. I hope if we talk about it over and over again, and they've seen me on the news and they've seen me do these things. And I'm hoping that those experiences that I have that scare the heck out of me, I hope that I can impart on them in a way that doesn't scar them, but makes them skeptical, makes them, what's super important, I think, is their willingness to speak up. Yes. And stand up to bullies and speak out if someone is getting treated poorly. I think that you can start that early. And I think that would translate later in life. If you see something like somebody being hazed or I think that you're more willing then to speak up. I
mean, bystanders could have helped Stone, right? All it took was one person to call 911 at any point in time.
That's right.
So you made me think, you talk about your wife and saying, wait a minute on Greek life. I was part of Greek life.
Sure.
Unfortunately, I encouraged Stone when he brought it to me to become part of the social aspects of going to school. I told him going to college is the best time of your life, right? But you got to be careful. You got to be smart. And he always was until this, right? And so what we have to caution females in sororities, be careful giving that advice to the male counterparts. It's not the same. I didn't experience any hazing. I went to a private school, totally different ball game, lot smaller scenarios, but I didn't experience any of that. Didn't even know that if it was going on, that it was. I just didn't know. But men, it's different. And I think that's my biggest regret, obviously, right? And to think that I was giving advice based on upon my experience. And I don't think we should do that to the extent that I know I was, right? I'm a lot older than he was. Time has passed, right? Things are different. To be able to be current with everything is very, very difficult. So when we think about that, so fast forward, 10, 12 years from now.
Sure.
And how do you keep up with what's going on in the world so that and recognize that? I knew the Colin Wyant situation, but I didn't absorb that and think about that and go, oh my God, I should tell Stone or it did not click for me.
Well, I don't think most people, when their loved ones go off to college, that there's an expectation that is going to happen. I think most people go off to college thinking you're going to learn, you're going to make new friends, you're going to, get into a profession. The expectation should not be that, well, they're going to experience this horrible thing. And so how do you keep up with it? I think the more that we see things in the news, the more we see, injuries and deaths and things like that, it's keeping it at the top of people's minds. I hope we never see another one, but I think we both understand that we will.
No.
As ridiculous as it is to say, it will continue to happen unless things change. And there's a lot of things I think that should change, but they haven't to date. Not to a point where there's a critical mass where there's a tipping point that things are going to change. It just hasn't happened yet.
Right.
I think there's some good things happening out there. Not enough.
Well, let's talk about those. I mean, what do you see that in your past you hadn't seen before and you think it's heading in the right direction?
So I think that the passing of Collins Law, I think, was a step in the right direction. Obviously, it makes certain types of hazing activities felonies. I think it could have gone further. Yeah. I think that we've obviously got the component, the transparency aspect of it, where things are supposed to be easily accessible. That is, I think, a failing. I don't think it's not the language or the intention. I don't mean that. I mean that the way it's been put into action by the universities is largely inadequate, in my view. I mean, we've tried to find that information. Right. It should be type it in and
it should come right up, right?
It's not that way. We know that. And so I think that's an aspect that could be done a lot better. And I have a lot of guesses why it's not easily accessible, right? I think the universities don't want it to be accessible for obvious reasons. They don't want parents to find that information, right? Or students, because if they do, maybe it pushes them to go somewhere else or to take less interest in a certain activity. But it's just, that's not where it needs to be yet. I think there's multiple levels, right? And I think it starts, frankly, at the top. You've got, the national organizations, Greek life, sororities, and fraternities. And I think you got, obviously, the university. So let's look at the Greek life first. Unless and until Greek organizations take responsibility for their local chapters, I don't think the problem gets solved. And the reason is you have these national organizations who are putting their imprimatur on these organizations. They're giving them the stamp of approval. Go ahead and operate, under ABC fraternity, whatever it is. Use our name, use our documents, have a house and put our letters up on it, right? But when something happens and someone gets hurt or killed, they are nowhere to be found. They're pointing the finger at the people in the room who have responsibility. Don't get me wrong, but there are others, right? National organizations, we don't oversee them. We don't have a duty to do anything. This is all their fault. We had no idea. That's bogus,
right?
To put it mildly, right? They know what goes on. They understand, they get reports, they have people that go into these local chapters and they do their investigations, and they talk to people and they get a rose-colored version of what's actually happening. But they're not really overseeing these organizations in any way, shape, or form. No. Same with college, largely with colleges and universities. And that's just not in Ohio, it's nationwide.
Sure.
And they're not doing enough either, right? And they're letting these groups operate on their campus or just off campus. And when something happens, they throw their hands up and say, well, how could we possibly have known? Because it happened at an off-campus house. Well, you have repeated violations, you have repeated complaints about these organizations. They can and they should do more. And I think unless and until that happens, it's a serious uphill battle.
Yeah, I agree. And I think there's a couple of things that you said in there that I find interesting. One being, I know with Bowling Green, obviously near and dear to our heart at this point. Um, they had this recent situation with the hockey scenario. Obviously, still a lot of more information to come out on that.
Sure.
But the one thing that they did, and I know that this happened after Stone, was as soon as they found out about it, they reported to the police department, right? And they got them involved. And I think that is important. It's kind of like how they handled Stone's case in the first place, right? Those detectives went in there assuming there's something criminal here.
They were there that night, right?
Right.
Or the early morning, they were there that day.
Yes.
And they were interviewing people and gathering cell phones and things like that.
So the more the police department can know where those off-campus housing are.
You've got a number of fraternity or sorority, men or women living in off-campus houses. Why can't or why shouldn't?
Just a list.
Right. Have a list.
Right.
Have a requirement. Right. If you're going to live off campus and you're going to live in a house with, I don't care if there's 4 of 8 or 4 of 7 or 2 of 9, it doesn't matter. Right. If you've got a large group of Greek individuals living in a house, and whether it's officially or unofficially used as a fraternity house, an annex, or whatever you want to call it, why shouldn't the university know that?
Right.
Right. You look at, the universities have access to 911 calls and run reports and complaints and code violations. So why should they be able to stick their head in the sand when that information is available? I don't have a good answer for that,
right.
Other than they shouldn't.
Right. I agree. So, you've seen a couple cases here just recently, right? With Colin and Stone. What is your perspective on hazing countrywide? So what I'm asking about is, I think about the athletes and then I think about Greek life. I believe there's a lot more hazing going on in athletics across the board. But what about those fraternity members and sorority members that are also athletes? Part of me is wondering how this connection point plays out. So, for example, if you were an athlete in high school, you were used to being hazed, right? Sure. You now go into a college experience and you're still being an athlete. And, oh, by the way, I get to do this social thing. Oh, yeah, that's the type of stuff we do all the time, right?
Well, I think we talked about high school, middle school. I think if these men or women are being hazed in high school, in their minds, their 16, 17, 18-year-old minds, it's normalizing that behavior.
That's exactly right.
So when they go off to college and they join this organization, Greek Life, it doesn't have to be Greek Life.
Yeah.
It could be a band. It could be a student organization. It could be an athletic team. And they experience something similar. In their minds, they think, well, this is what it is. This is what you do. Because no one's ever told them differently.
Right.
And so that's why I think the education component, and the earlier you can get to them, the better.
I agree. So why do hazers haze?
Well, I think there's a lot of reasons. I think part of it is in there, and I don't agree with this, but part of it I think is tradition. Part of it is the power that they view themselves as having. Part of it is they went through that themselves, and so they want to make it a little bit worse for the next group. From a tradition standpoint, they hear, better or worse, they hear it from the older members. Well, this has been going on for 100 years. This has been going on since the organization started. Everyone's done this, right? As if because that's the way it was done, it's okay, which it isn't. And so I think that in their minds, they're like, well, if everyone did it, then I'm going to do it too. Right. And I don't know if it's this machismo thing of, well, I have to do this terrible thing because every one of my fraternity brothers did it. That doesn't fit in my brain. I think people just, these young men and women, they get into this organization and they view it as, I want to do to others what was done to me. And they view it as bond building. Like, we're going to build these bonds and these brotherhoods and sisterhoods. Why do you need to do? And we could talk about the specifics of some of these cases, but there's some really heinous, dangerous, deadly things that happen. Why do you need to force someone to do this or make them do this incredibly dangerous thing to build brotherhood? Why? There is no good reason for that. None. You just don't need it. Why can't you do a million other things? It's like, why does it have to be dangerous or deadly?
Well, and why does that build a better bond, right?
It doesn't.
It makes no sense.
It does. It's a shared trauma. I mean, I can call it that. It's a shared, well, we're all going to potentially lose our lives, so somehow we're closer. That doesn't make sense.
Well, and I think that's one of the things that a lot of the social workers will tell you is it's trauma bonding, right? You're exactly bonding. It's just like a domestic violence case, right? You can't leave. Why can't they leave? Well, they've got that bond with that person that's creating the abuse.
That's right.
Which is really, the fact that starts out at such a young age, to me, the whole mental health aspect is something we got to get our arms around. Good mental health. It's not like we're going to go in there and go, oh my God, you guys are all messed up and we got to fix you.
Right.
No, we're trying to make that a good, healthy situation, not where you're, having them do calisthenics and beating the crap out of them. Right. So I don't know. I don't understand it. So since you're a lawyer, do you think that there should be more laws on this?
I think there need to be stronger laws on this. I think that, more laws doesn't necessarily equal safety or safer society. I think it's the laws that we have aren't bad. I think, again, Collins Law was an absolute step in the right direction, in my view. I think it's the enforcement of the laws. And I think that's going to involve the local police departments on these college campuses. It's going to involve the county prosecutors to do the right thing. I think that, had Collins Law been in place when Stone was going through this process, I think that each and every single one of these people who were involved, we sat through the criminal trial together, they would all be convicted felons, every single one of them. If that law had been in place, I think it would be way easier for a jury to come to that conclusion. They see things like reckless homicide and negligent homicide and manslaughter, and in their minds, because they're not up to speed on hazing and all the different aspects and the power imbalance and why people do what they do, they say, well, we're not going to, in 19, 20, 20, we're not going to put him in prison or whatever it is. They don't know the penalties. But if the prosecutors were able to get up there, as they can now, as of Collins Law, and say, this is a felony, right? This conduct equals a felony offense. I think prosecutors would have another tool, and they do now. They would have had another tool in their belt. And I think
would have been a much easier play, right?
I think it would have been a much different situation. And I think they all would have suffered more serious consequences.
Well, and I think that what we have to look for, I think the next case that comes out, right? Because there's going to be one. It'll be, unfortunately, interesting to watch. But at the end of the day, the jury may still say, hey, yep, they're good. They committed the crime, but it's whether or not the judge is able to actually make the penalty be something that matters.
I think you're right. And we are reliant. Look, we have, better or worse, we have the criminal justice system we have.
Yes.
I often tell people when I talk to them about the civil side of the system, it's not it's not perfect, but it's the one we have, right? And so we have to operate within it. I think the same goes for the criminal side of the system. You've got to rely on prosecutors to do their job. You got to rely on prosecutors to bring appropriate charges. You got to rely on prosecutors to move cases forward and not be, just offering deals, cutting deals just to get rid of people. Not that I'm saying that's what happened here necessarily, but you have to have prosecutors who are willing to try the case, right? To let a jury make that determination. We have to rely on juries, too. And that can be scary.
Sure.
Right. There's unknowns. You're putting that decision, this critically important decision, in the hands of strangers who don't know the first thing about hazing or, oftentimes what happened. And then, as you said, you have to rely on the judges, and judges are elected, and judges have to make decisions to the best of their ability. And I won't comment on, that specifically, but I think that we're putting an awful lot of reliance on the system. I don't have a better system. I think that I hope the more this happens, which unfortunately we know it will, judges become more educated. Judges have, much like prosecutors, have this tool belt or this additional tool in their tool belt about felony charges. Judges then can say, well, what is a felony offense? There's different punishments that can come with that. Mm-hmm. And they're able to put in place what I view as a more appropriate punishment.
That makes sense. So there's one thing that I remember you saying, well, there's a couple things, as we were working through all of this. And One was, they're going to lie. They're lying. Right. And I was like, oh, come on, not all of them. Right. And it was all of them. Right. And I guess I was more hurt by the fact that no one could stand up for him and tell the truth after the fact, even.
Right.
And the fact that everybody went and was more interested in covering it up than even reaching out to where, Stone needed help. I think the other thing that's interesting is that as you experience a criminal civil situation like we did, a lot of confusion around a lot of different components of the law, right?
Sure.
I mean, we got schooled pretty quickly because we had to, right? And the one thing that you guys did as a group was, we're going to keep repeating it. Why is it? Why is it that as we're going through that type of scenario, that you have to keep repeating the information you're passing along? It just seems like, why aren't we able to absorb that? You've seen victims on that side. What is it that you see, and how do you help them do that?
So I think one of the reasons that we need to repeat things is, for us, for the lawyers, it's something we've been through before. Maybe not the exact situation, maybe not the exact facts, but we've been through it. So we know what to expect. We know what the law is. We know what the defenses are. We know what's coming. I could have told you, hey, the phone's going to start ringing from the media. But for folks in your shoes, right, who haven't been through it before, who haven't experienced that type of situation, it's all new. Every single thing that happens is new. It's not like you have any foundation upon which to build. I mean, other than me repeating things over and over again. And sometimes it's counterintuitive. Mm-hmm. It doesn't make sense. Not because what I'm saying doesn't make sense, but because intuitively the way that the law is set up or the way that the system works doesn't make sense. And so we have to repeat things, and that's okay, right? I will repeat things over and over and over again until I'm blue in the face, until a client understands things. And it's not you don't understand it. It's I'm not explaining it maybe the right way. And so I view it as a me issue, not as opposed to a client issue.
Okay. I don't know. For some reason that stuck with me. And I guess, a big message would be, the type of lawyer that you get makes a difference, right? I mean, you're going through a lot. And our situation was a huge tragedy, right? It's not like he survived. But victims that are surviving are due their time as well. And I think the mental aspects of that, hearing about suicides because they can't deal with it, it just seems to me that we need to be able to find ways to get justice for all of these people, because it's just, I don't know how else we're going to actually get that to be more prevalent. People aren't hearing about it.
I think the cases people hear about are the ones that are in the news.
Yes.
The cases like Stone or like Colin or some of the other ones across the country where somebody unfortunately has died. The other situations like the Tyler Perinos of the world, you don't, I know who he is, you know who he is, but the general public doesn't, because he survived, right? He was lucky, right? He made it. He's now applying to grad school and doing all the things that, someone of his age ought to be doing. But his name isn't in the public vernacular. He doesn't have a Wikipedia page with all the details of what happened in that case. Perhaps people in those shoes may respect a little bit more privacy.
Sure, which I would totally understand as well.
Tyler and other folks who represented, they're out there speaking, right? They're out there talking about their experience and educating others in a way that gives them a really unique perspective, right? To go into a room and say, I experienced this. This is exactly what happened to me. Because there are people out there, we both know who the type of people I'm talking about, who think this is Stone's fault, right? This is Colin's fault. This is et cetera, et cetera. I think they don't understand, and they haven't heard from someone who went through it to understand why they did what they did, right? They don't understand the psychology. They don't understand, right, the background, the power imbalance. And so I think that education, right? People like Tyler and others, they can get out there. They have a really unique perspective to do that.
I agree with you. And that brings us to our last question. As you know, our foundation focuses on saving lives. Do you have any thoughts on how we can make a larger impact?
I think, and we talked a little bit about education, I think the earlier you can get into schools, the better. And I think whether it's middle school or whatever it is, because once they experience it and they don't have that framework, they don't know, you experience something new and you have to find a way in your brain to like, well, how does this fit? Does it make sense? Right? Especially when you're young and you don't have all those life experiences. But if you have gone through multiple sessions or a class even,
Right.
where there's training and you now know, okay, I see that behavior, right? I recognize it. It's bullying, it's hazing, it's whatever you want to, whatever it is. And now I know what to do, right? Because I've been taught that, right? We tell our kids, like, what do you do if a stranger comes up to you, right? And you tell them, and they know, even mine, right? The 5.5 and the 4-year-old know what to do if a stranger comes up to them. But if you're in middle school and you're being bullied or you're being, other than punching someone in the nose, right? What do? Do you go talk to somebody? Do you tell a teacher? Do you tell a parent? And I think we need to arm our kids, right, with the information they need to deal with these situations. To me, that's, unless, again, we're going to need organizational buy-in and university buy-in. But I think short of that, it's the earlier we start, the better.
Okay. Thanks, Sean, for joining us. Thanks, everyone, for listening to us, and please subscribe.